Maybe 120 days from now, you will be exactly where you are today, unless you make a different choice. Not a grand, dramatic choice. Not a life turnaround overnight. A small choice repeated every single day, even when you don't feel like it. Especially when you don't feel like it. There is a Japanese concept that the West barely knows. It's not Kaizen or Ichigyo-Zammai. It's nothing you've ever seen on a motivational poster on some office wall. The name of this concept is Sekishō I. The literal translation is simple. Small accumulations become great results. Sounds obvious, right? You've heard something like it before, Ephraim, but there is a massive difference between knowing this and truly understanding what it means for your life. Because the Japanese didn't treat this concept as a catchy phrase. They treated it as a law of nature. Like the law of gravity, you don't argue with gravity. You learn how to use it. And when you learn how to use sinusoid and the 4 principles that orbit around it, something changes. Not just what you do, but who you are. Today, you will discover how an ordinary man with no exceptional talent, without any special conditions, can transform body, mind, career, and life. In 120 days, you will discover how you too can start changing your life in just 120 days. And by the end, you will understand why 120 days is not the destination. It is only the first step of a ladder that lasts a lifetime. And that is exactly what makes this journey worth it. Chapter 1. The day Chris stopped lying to himself. I'll start this video by telling you the story of Chris. Perhaps you will recognize yourself in his life. Chris was 34 years old. He had his health. He had an apartment. He had a bank account that wasn't completely empty, but he had been laid off 3 months prior. And instead of reacting, he entered that state you might already know too well. The waiting state. He sent out resumes, watched TV shows, stayed up late, woke up without a purpose. He repeated this every day as if time was something that existed in infinite abundance. Chris wasn't lazy in the classic sense. He was paralyzed. There is a difference. The lazy person doesn't want to move. The paralyzed person wants to move very badly, but he doesn't know where to go. And this uncertainty weighs more than any physical burden, until the day he was on his phone on a Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and stumbled upon an Instagram post. A guy named Marcus, 34 years old, lived in the same city, came from the exact same background. Yet Marcus was successful. Marcus had launched a small software company, went running every single morning, and seemed to have something Chris didn't. Direction. Chris stared at the profile for 4 minutes. Then he closed the app. He lay there staring at the ceiling, and the pain he felt took a clear shape. It was recognition. The difference between him and Marcus was that Marcus was in motion while Chris was on standby. Chris knew he had a problem and that he needed to take action, but he had no idea that a specific solution for this even existed, and this is the point where many people just end up giving up because they believe their problem has no solution. They believe they can't beat laziness or procrastination, that they won't be able to change the landscape of their lives. At this point, many give up and simply accept living a mediocre, unhappy life. But while some simply accept defeat, people like you who are watching this video are looking to break down every barrier separating you from the life you deserve to live. A victorious life. Just like you, Chris decided to look for a solution. Chapter 2. The Search That Led to Alan. In the following days, Chris did what men in that state do. He researched YouTube videos, Reddit threads about how to restart life after 30, podcasts about habits, discipline, productivity. He absorbed a lot and applied almost nothing. Because the problem wasn't a lack of information. The world has never had so much information available. The problem was that every piece of information promised a fast, visible, dramatic transformation. And every time Chris tried and didn't see immediate results, he interpreted it as failure, and he quit until one night he fell down an old thread on a philosophy forum. Someone had posted a comment about a Japanese concept he had never heard of. Sekishō I Dai. Small accumulations become great results. But what caught Chris's attention wasn't the concept itself. It was the person who wrote the comment. The signature read, Alan Mercer, former Kyoto resident for 11 years, human performance consultant. Chris spent an hour reading everything he could find by Alan. He wasn't a guru. He didn't have an expensive online course. He didn't have millions of followers, but the things he wrote had a different kind of density. They didn't promise anything fast. Alan talked about progress using stones as an example. He talked about accumulation, about the process. Chris sent him a direct message. Simple. I read what you wrote about Sekishō I Dai. I'm at a point in my life where I need to understand this better. 3 days later, Alan replied, Music, 4 words. When can we meet? They met at a park. Alan was in his mid-50s, but he looked much younger. There was no small talk. They greeted each other and went straight to the point. Alan looked at Chris and asked directly, What did you do today that will matter 120 days from now? Chris didn't answer because he didn't have an answer. Alan didn't fill the silence. He let the question land. Then he spoke. I spent 11 years in Japan. I got there lost just like you. I knew I had a problem. I didn't know a solution existed. And what I discovered there wasn't a method. It was a law. Alan opened a notebook and wrote it down. Sekishō I Dai. He said the Japanese didn't invent this. They just had the wisdom to name what nature was already doing. A mountain doesn't rise from an explosion. It rises from deposit upon deposit, each layer invisible on its own, but the final result is undeniable. The problem with modern man, Alan continued, is that he expects an explosion. He wants the mountain to be formed in 30 days. And when that doesn't happen, he concludes the plan failed. But what he doesn't understand is that he was already building, except he was building the wrong thing. Chris asked, What do you mean the wrong thing? Alan closed the notebook. You spent the last 3 months depositing fragmentation, inconsistency, and waiting. Sekishō I Dai works in any direction. You are always accumulating something. The question is what? And here lies the second biggest mistake we make when we want to change our habits. Most people don't realize that everything you do takes you in a certain direction. It can be a good direction or a bad one. For example, if you eat fast food every day, you are accumulating bad meals, and those bad meals will take you somewhere. They can lead you to a physique you dislike, to a sedentary life. Do you see how everything you do takes you somewhere? Now, instead of accumulating bad meals, what if you accumulate good decisions, like eating more quality protein, eating less processed food, drinking more water, walking more during the day? Little by little, this will lead you to a new life where you'll feel more vibrant, happier with your body, and have more energy to chase your goals. Everything is a construction, so choose to build something that serves you. That's what Alan taught Chris during their second meeting. Chapter 3. Kaizen, but not the way they taught you. On their second meeting, Alan brought a notepad and wrote the word Kaizen. Kaizen. You've heard this before. Get 1% better every day. Forget the 1%, he said. Don't focus on the 1%. Chris was confused. But isn't that exactly what Kaizen is? Kaizen means continuous improvement. The word continuous is what matters, not the percentage. Alan explained, the West took Kaizen and turned it into math. 1% a day, compounding results, exponential graphs, beautiful on paper, useless in practice. Because people hear 1% and think, I need to measure my progress, I need to see the growth. And when the graph doesn't climb the way they expected, they quit. True Kaizen is not about improvement, it is about continuity. Think about it this way, he told Chris. One workout seems like nothing. One reading session seems like nothing. One walk seems like nothing. But 120 workouts, 120 reading sessions, 120 walks, that changes everything. The goal is not to improve by 1%, Alan said. The goal is to never interrupt the process. Chris fell silent for a moment. But what about when I don't feel like it? Alan smiled. That is the moment that matters, and that is the next concept you need to learn. Here I want to emphasize something. I've talked about the concept of Kaizen several times here on the channel. We know Kaizen is about continuous improvement, but many people get trapped by numbers and performance. Kaizen is actually about consistency. This means that if you set a goal to read every day, and you started by reading 5 pages a day, you don't need to increase the number of pages every single day. Of course, over time, you will naturally feel the need to read more because it becomes second nature. So the point is to focus on the process so that the habits become internalized. For that to happen, you need to repeat the same habit every day with consistency without obsessing over numbers, but focusing on discipline instead. Chapter 4. Ichigyo-Zammai. The question the samurai asks. Now, let's address another extremely relevant point. Perhaps your problem is different. Perhaps it's a lack of focus. Alan wrote in the notebook, total attention on a single task. Modern man wakes up and thinks, how am I going to change my life? And he is paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the question. The samurai wakes up and thinks about one single thing. What do I need to do today? Alan looked at Chris. Do you know what the biggest saboteur of your 120 days is? It's not laziness. It's the fragmentation of your attention. You wake up and you're immediately on your phone checking feeds, news, messages. Your brain has already started the day divided, and a divided brain accumulates nothing. Ichigyo-Zammai is not a productivity technique. It is a declaration of where your attention will land first. For the first 90 minutes of the day, you belong to a single task. 1. No phone, no news, no email. One task that builds the direction you chose. This sounds simple, but it is what will make your 120 days different from every other time you've tried. Chris asked, what if something urgent comes up? Alan answered without hesitation. Almost nothing is urgent in the real sense of the word. What we call urgency is almost always other people's anxiety demanding our immediate attention. The samurai didn't respond to every noise on the battlefield. He identified what mattered and focused his strike. You are no different except your battlefield is internal. What Alan was describing to Chris has a solid scientific foundation. Gloria Mark, a researcher at the University of California, Irvine, has studied the cost of attention fragmentation for over 15 years. She discovered that after every digital interruption, it takes the human brain an average of 23 minutes to return to its deep state of focus. Considering that the average phone is unlocked 96 times a day, a metric tracked by IDC research, this means most people never actually reach a state of true deep focus. Not once, not a single day. This is your environment fighting against you. Learn one thing. Your environment shapes you. So either you change your environment or you will forever be molded by it. Apply Ichigyo-Zammai to your life. Do each task with full awareness. Put the phone away and focus on the task right in front of you. This isn't just an aesthetic preference for silence. It is the only rational response to a world designed to fragment you. Chapter 5. Ganbaru. What happens on day 43? Chris started his transformation plan, and he started exceptionally well, just like most people do. He would wake up at 5:30 a.m. He worked out, he read, he worked in focused blocks. First week, high motivation. Second week, the machine was rolling. Third week, Chris felt for the first time what every person trying to change eventually feels: the void. It was simply the absence of emotional fuel. The motivation was gone, and with it, the feeling that it was even worth continuing. He called Alan. Alan listened to everything. Then he said, "You've reached the right spot." Chris didn't understand. There is a Japanese concept I saved to tell you about right here at this exact moment, because it only makes sense when you are living it. Ganbaru. Ganbaru doesn't mean winning. It doesn't mean succeeding. It doesn't mean being the best. Ganbaru means to persist through hardship, to carry on against all odds. Just that, Alan continued. Motivation is a deceptive resource. It shows up at the beginning when everything is new, and it vanishes exactly when you need it most. On day 43, there is no motivation. On day 68, there is no motivation. On day 91, there is no motivation. What exists is Ganbaru, the quiet choice to keep going, not because you feel like it, but because you are the kind of person who keeps going. That is the difference between people who change and people who just try to change. Most people who transform their lives don't possess superhuman discipline. The difference lies in the ability to operate without emotional fuel. We all go through this inflection point when the motivation drains away and we no longer feel the drive to continue. This might be your brain trying to trick you because the brain doesn't want you to leave your comfort zone. So it will force you to conserve energy. It will try to make you lazier. Your body will feel slower. Maybe you'll feel sleepier during the day or more tired. That is exactly when your environment changes everything. If this critical moment arrives and your surroundings are chaotic and undisciplined, the chances of you sliding back into old habits are massive because everything will pull you back to your comfort zone. So, strive to change everything around you. And when you hit that wall, remember Ganbaru. Chris fell silent. So, what do I do today? He asked. Exactly what you did yesterday, Alan replied. Nothing more, nothing less. Chapter 6. Mashi's Teaching and the 1,000 Days. On their 5th meeting, Alan brought a book, Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest swordsman Japan ever produced, a man who never lost a single duel. Alan opened to a specific page and read aloud, 1,000 days to forge, 10,000 days to refine. He closed the book. Musashi wasn't talking about swords, Alan said. He was talking about anything worth building. 1,000 days to forge, that is roughly 3 years. 10,000 days to refine, that is nearly 30 years. Now, tell me something, Chris. If it takes 1,000 days to forge a warrior, what can 120 days do for you? The answer, music, isn't nothing, but it isn't everything either. The answer is enough to know who you are capable of becoming. 120 days build the foundation. They create the neural pattern that will sustain everything that comes after. They prove to your own brain that you are someone who finishes what they start. It took Musashi 1,000 days to forge. He didn't wake up on day 1,000 as a complete warrior. He woke up on day 1,000 knowing that the next phase could finally begin. Your 120 days are exactly that. Day 1 of a process that lasts as long as you choose to live with intention. What Alan was teaching Chris resonates directly with the discoveries of modern neuroscience. Philip Alai, a researcher at University College London, conducted a study tracking 96 participants over 12 weeks as they tried to build new habits. The conclusion was definitive. New behaviors take an average of 66 days to become automatic, not the 21 days that self-help marketing has been selling for decades. If you follow this channel, you already know this. 66 days. This means that during the first 2 months, you are literally building new neural pathways. The brain is being physically remodeled, not metaphorically, physically. Roy Baumeister, a psychologist at Florida State University, studied what he termed ego depletion, the exhaustion of willpower. His conclusion: willpower is a finite resource that gets depleted throughout the day. This explains why decisions made in the morning are vastly different from decisions made at night. And it explains why Ichigyo-Zammai, putting your most important task at the very beginning of the day, music, isn't just a personal preference. It is a neurological strategy. Sekishō I Dai is not some mystical wisdom. It is a precise description of how the human brain actually functions. Chapter 7. What happened to Chris? On day 47, Chris looked at himself in the mirror after his workout. It wasn't the body he ultimately wanted yet, but it was clearly different from what he had on day 1. On day 61, he submitted an application to a company that just a month prior he would have considered way out of his league because his perception of himself had shifted. On day 78, motivation returned. However, this time it was a different kind of motivation, quieter, more solid. The motivation of someone who has seen hard evidence of their own character. On day 91, Alan asked him, "What has changed in you?" Chris thought for a moment. I am no longer waiting to feel ready to start. I just start, and the feeling follows. Alan nodded. That is Ganbaru in practice. That is Sekishō I Dai in motion. You didn't find motivation. You found something better. You found momentum. On day 120, Chris hadn't arrived exactly where he ultimately wanted to be. But he was no longer the man he used to be. And for the first time in a very long time, he knew exactly where he was going. But here is what most people don't realize about Chris's journey and about their own journey. Day 120 wasn't a finish line. It was a mirror. Because in 120 days, you don't see the final result. You see the proof that the process works. You see who you are when things get tough. You see what you are capable of building when you stop waiting for perfect conditions. And then something happens that no one warns you about. You realize you don't want to stop because the process itself has taken on meaning. The workout is no longer just a means to a body. The workout is part of who you are. The focus is no longer just a tool for your career. The focus is part of your identity. And then you understand what the Japanese knew centuries ago. The pleasure is not in the destination. The pleasure is in the accumulation. The pleasure is in the process. This is Sekishō I Dai in its deepest form. Chapter 8. The 120 days are the beginning, not the end, Alan told Chris in one of their final conversations. In Japan, there is a way of understanding time that is very different from the West. The West views time as a line. You start at point A and you need to get to point B. The value is placed on the arrival. Japan views time as a cycle. Each day is complete in itself. The value is in the daily practice, not the final destination. There is no day when a samurai looks in the mirror and says, "Now I am finished forging myself." The forging is the work of a lifetime. And here is the paradox the West never understands. Precisely because the process has no end, it is capable of sustaining meaning forever. If there is a finish line, one day you cross it, and then what? Where do you go next? But if the process is life itself, if Sekishō I Dai is the way you exist in the world, then every morning you wake up with a renewed purpose. Not because the goal changed, but because the path continues. Chris asked, "So what do I do after day 120? Alan smiled. "You begin day 121, but you begin it differently because now you know who you are when things get hard. And that is worth more than any specific result these 120 days could ever give you. So to make sure everything we talked about stays locked in your mind, let's recap a few key points. The core concept of this video is Sekishō I Dai. Small accumulations become great results. A law of nature that the Japanese transformed into a life practice. A mountain doesn't rise from an explosion. It rises layer upon layer, deposit upon deposit, stone upon stone. The first principle Alan taught Chris was Kaizen, but not the way the corporate world sells it. It's not about getting 1% better, it's about never interrupting the process. Because 120 repetitions of anything will change the fabric of who you are. The second principle was Ichigyo-Zammai, total attention on a single task. Modern man asks how he's going to change his life. The samurai asks what he needs to do today. This difference in perspective is the exact difference between paralysis and movement. The third principle was Ganbaru, to keep going despite the difficulty. On day 43, motivation vanishes. On day 68, it disappears again. On day 91, it drops for a third time. Ganbaru is what remains when motivation leaves. It is the quiet choice to be the person who stays the course. And Musashi taught us that 1,000 days forge a warrior. If 1,000 days are required to forge, what can 120 days do for you? The answer: build the foundation. Prove to your own brain that you are a person who keeps going. And the most important lesson of all, 120 days will change something in you. That is a certainty. But 120 days are not the final destination. They are the first step of a staircase that lasts a lifetime, and the joy, the true joy, is in the walk. It's in the process. It's in accumulating day after day the small stones that will one day become mountains. You need to be in motion. Being in motion will bring you peace. Chris understood this on day 120, and you can understand it right now. The question that remains is not what will you achieve in 120 days. The question is, who will you choose to become? Because achievements fade, character stays, and every single small stone you deposit from this day forward will be part of a mountain that only you can build. Sekishō I, small accumulations become great results. Start today, not tomorrow. Today with one stone, just one. If this video made sense to you, if you felt this was exactly what you needed to hear, then I have a request. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on the notification bell. Every week there is new content here based on Japanese philosophy applied to real life without superficiality, empty promises, or magic formulas. Also, leave a like. It seems like a small thing, but that is exactly how this content reaches more people who truly need it. And tell me in the comments, what will be your first stone? What is the habit, the practice, the movement you're going to start today? What is your commitment for the next 120 days? Write it down in the comments. Declaring it publicly is part of the process. And if you enjoyed this video, I invite you to watch one of the videos appearing on your screen right now. You will surely gain an excellent insight that complements everything we saw here today. Thank you for being here. Until the next video.